My wife refused to drive me to my dying mother. I have more important things to do. What would you do if the person you loved most treated you like an afterthought? When Caleb's father was dying, his wife had just one response: take an Uber. That moment changed everything. What started as a marriage built on trust crumbled into deception, betrayal, and a shocking revelation that would leave Caleb with no choice but to strike back. But he didn't just walk away, he won, in a way she never saw coming. Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn you won't believe. It was a Friday afternoon. The kind of day that should have been uneventful, just another stretch of hours between work and the weekend. The sky was clear, the air thick with the smell of freshly cut grass. I was outside, fixing the loose planks on our backyard fence, sweat dripping down my back as I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. It wasn't the kind of work one needed to do right away, but lately, I found myself looking for reasons to stay outside, to stay away from the house, from her. Then, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, my heart immediately sinking at the sight of the number flashing across it. The hospital. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I swiped to answer. Hello? The voice on the other end was urgent, trembling. Is this Caleb Morris? Yes, I said, my grip tightening around the phone. This is Dr. Reeves from Mercy General. Your father, Thomas Morris, was brought in about 30 minutes ago. He suffered a severe stroke. I'm afraid it's critical. You need to come right away. For a second, my brain refused to process what I'd just heard. My father, tough as nails, a man who had spent his entire life working with his hands, who had taught me everything I knew about resilience, was now lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. My knees almost buckled, but I forced myself to move. Is he awake? I asked, my voice hoarse. He was when he arrived, but his condition is deteriorating. He's been asking for you, Mr. Morris. You should come now. That was all I needed to hear. I turned, rushing toward the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. I threw open the back door and stepped inside. Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, one AirPod in her ear. She was typing furiously, a frown on her face. Vanessa, the first said, breathless. She didn't look up. 1 sec, Vanessa, the first repeated, louder this time. She let out an irritated sigh and finally turned her gaze toward me. What? My dad. I stopped, my throat tightening. I swallowed hard and forced the words out. He had a stroke. It's bad. He's in critical condition. I need to get to the hospital. Her brows furrowed, but there was no real concern in her eyes, only mild inconvenience. Oh, she said, glancing at her screen. That's awful. Can't you take an Uber? I have back-to-back meetings. At that moment, I felt something inside me snap. A small part of me had been expecting something: shock, worry, maybe even the slightest hesitation as she considered whether her important meeting was really more important than her husband's dying father. But no. Nothing. She might as well have been talking about a delayed Amazon package. I stared at her, waiting for her to realize how insane her response was. But she just sighed again, her fingers already moving back to the keyboard. Caleb, I can't just drop everything. You know how my schedule is. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Are you serious right now? My voice was rising, but I didn't care. My dad is in the hospital, Vanessa. He could die. And you're telling me to just call a goddamn Uber? She looked up again, this time with annoyance. I get that this is hard for you, she said, like she was trying to explain something to a child. But I have deadlines. Responsibilities. I can't just throw my day away. Throw her day away. That was what she thought this was, an inconvenience. A minor disruption to her perfectly curated schedule. I felt my chest tighten, not just with anger, but with a deep, gnawing realization, one that had been growing for years but had never fully taken shape until this exact moment. She didn't care. Not about me. Not about my father. Not about anything that didn't serve her needs. My voice was eerily calm when I spoke again. Forget it. I'll drive myself. Fine, she said with a dismissive shrug. Let me know how it goes. I didn't say another word. I turned, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. The air outside was thick and humid, pressing against my skin as I hurried to my truck. My fingers shook as I shoved the key into the ignition, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. Focus. Get to the hospital. The drive was a blur. My mind raced through every possible worst-case scenario. What if I didn't make it in time? What if the last thing I ever said to my dad had been something stupid and meaningless? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. 20 minutes later, I was running down the sterile hallways of Mercy General, the scent of antiseptic filling my nose. My breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as I reached the ICU. A nurse pointed me toward room 217 and I pushed the door open. And there he was, my father. He looked so much smaller than I remembered. The man who had once been larger than life, who had taught me how to build, how to fight, how to stand my ground, was now hooked up to machines, his face pale, his breathing slow and labored. Uncle James was sitting beside him, his hands clasped tightly. He gave me a sad nod. He's been asking for you. One swallowed hard and moved closer. Dad, I whispered. His eyes fluttered open, and for a brief moment, there was clarity in them. He managed a weak smile. Caleb, he rasped. I took his hand carefully, mindful of the IVs. His grip was weak, but it was there. I'm here, Dad. I'm right here. He studied my face, and what he said next hit me harder than anything I could have prepared for. You're not happy, son. His voice was barely more than a whisper, but the weight of those words settled over me like a ton of bricks. I've seen it. You deserve more than this. I blinked rapidly, trying to push back the burning in my eyes. Dad, let's not talk about that right now. You need to rest. But he shook his head, as much as his frail body would allow. Listen to me, he insisted. Life is too short to waste on people who don't see your worth. My throat tightened. He knew. He had seen it. All these years. The way Vanessa treated me. The way I let it happen. Promise me, he said, his grip tightening slightly. Promise me you'll choose happiness, Caleb. My chest ached. I wanted to tell him that I already had happiness. That I had built a life, a marriage. That Vanessa and I had our ups and downs, but we were still partners. But the words wouldn't come. Because I knew they weren't true. So I gave him the only thing I could. I promise. A few moments later, his grip went limp, and then the machines let out a long, flat tone. The world around me blurred as the nurses rushed in. Uncle James placed a hand on my shoulder, but I barely noticed. Because in that moment, I realized something. That phone call had changed everything. But Vanessa's reaction? That was the moment I knew. Knew that my marriage was over. Knew that I couldn't keep living like this. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The house was dark when I got home that night. The only light came from Vanessa's office. A faint glow spilling into the hallway. My body felt like it was running on autopilot. Exhaustion pressing down on me like a weight. I couldn't shake. My father was gone. Just like that. One moment he was there, holding my hand, his voice a frail whisper as he made me promise to choose happiness. The next, the monitors flatlined, and the world as I knew it tilted on its axis. I had spent hours at the hospital handling paperwork, answering questions, making arrangements. I barely remembered the drive home. But one thing was crystal clear: this wasn't just about today. This was about every moment leading up to it. Every time Vanessa had made me feel like I didn't matter. Every choice I had made to overlook it, to tell myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But now? There was no more pretending. I stood in the hallway, gripping the doorknob to our bedroom, trying to decide whether I had it in me to go in there, to face her. But the thought of walking into that room, into our bed, felt suffocating. Instead, I turned and walked into the spare room, the one we never used, the one where I had tossed old boxes and forgotten furniture. I pulled off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bare mattress, my elbows resting on my knees. My hands were still shaking, the ghost of my father's touch lingering in my palms. I had promised him something, and I had no idea how the hell I was going to keep it. The next morning, the smell of coffee drifted through the house, but it wasn't warm or inviting. It was just another part of the routine. Vanessa's machine, brewing the same expensive blend she liked, the one she never bothered asking if I enjoyed. I walked into the kitchen, my head pounding, my body stiff from a night of restless sleep. She was standing by the counter, scrolling through her phone, dressed in a sleek black pantsuit, looking as polished and put together as ever. Like today was just another day. Like nothing had changed. She glanced up briefly. Hey, you got in late. I stared at her, waiting for something, anything. A sign that she cared. A hint of concern. An acknowledgement of what had happened. Nothing. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. Yeah, I said flatly, moving to grab a cup from the cabinet. Vanessa tapped at her screen, her focus already shifting elsewhere. So, I checked my calendar, and I can't do the funeral during the week. But if it's on Saturday, I can make it. My hand tightened around the handle of the coffee cup. I turned slowly to face her. You can't do it during the week? She sighed like I was being unreasonable. Caleb, I have meetings. I'm already scheduled for back-to-backs through Thursday. I'd have to move a lot of things around. I let out a breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Vanessa. My dad died. I know that. She put her phone down, crossing her arms. And I'm trying to be there for you, but I have responsibilities too. If the funeral is on Saturday, I can be there. If it's not, she shrugged, like it was out of her hands. I can send flowers. Send flowers. I set my cup down before I broke it in my grip. You don't get it, do you? She exhaled sharply, shifting her weight onto one foot. Caleb, I understand that this is hard for you, but you're acting like I don't care. Do you? The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Her expression hardened. Of course, I care. But you're not the only person dealing with things, you know? You don't think this is inconvenient for me too? Inconvenient. That word sat between us like a landmine, ready to detonate. A humorless laugh slipped from my lips. I nodded slowly, running a hand down my face. Right. Of course, your schedule is what really matters here. She sighed again, exasperated. I don't have time for this right now. Caleb. I have to be at the office in 20 minutes. She grabbed her bag and keys, pausing at the door. Let me know what you decide about the funeral. Then, she was gone. The silence she left in her wake was deafening. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty kitchen, my pulse hammering in my ears. There it was, the truth I had been avoiding for years. She didn't love me. Not really. Not in the way someone was supposed to love their partner. Not in the way my dad had loved my mom, fiercely and without question. Not in the way I had wanted to believe she loved me. She loved control. She loved convenience. She loved herself. I was just another part of the structure of her life, one that could be adjusted, rescheduled, replaced. And suddenly, I knew. I wasn't going to let this be my life anymore. I walked back into the spare room, my mind already moving, calculating. If I was going to leave, I needed to be smart about it. Vanessa wasn't the type to take losing well. She wasn't going to make this easy. I grabbed my laptop and opened a private browser. Claire Donovan, divorce attorney. The name popped up at the top of the search results. A reputable firm with a history of handling high-stakes divorces. I clicked on the link, my heart thudding against my ribs, as I typed out a quick inquiry. Hi, my name is Caleb Morris. I need to discuss a potential divorce case. My situation is complicated, and I need legal guidance before making any decisions. Please let me know when we can talk. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. There. The first step. I sat back, exhaling slowly. My chest felt tight, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't from dread. It was something else. Something like relief. The door clicked open, and I tensed, half expecting Vanessa to have forgotten something. To come back inside and start another argument. But it wasn't her. It was silence. An empty house. I closed my laptop, leaning back against the mattress. This was it. This was the beginning of the end. And this time, I wasn't going to stop it. Caleb thought his marriage was falling apart, but he had no idea just how deep the betrayal went. Secret accounts. Hidden transactions. A life insurance policy. In his name that he never signed. Vanessa had been planning something far worse than he imagined. But here's the real question: what would you do in his shoes? Would you confront her? Walk away? Or set up the perfect revenge? Comment 1 if you'd confront her. Comment 2 FUT if you'd disappear and let her face the fallout. I sat in the spare room for what felt like hours, staring at the dim glow of my laptop screen. The email to Claire Donovan had been sent, but I hadn't heard back yet. It didn't matter. The moment I clicked send, something inside me shifted. There was no turning back now. The weight of the last 12 years settled onto my chest, pressing down with an intensity I could no longer ignore. I had spent so much time pretending things weren't that bad, convincing myself that Vanessa wasn't as cold, as indifferent, as self-absorbed as she seemed. But last night had shattered that illusion. It wasn't just about the way she reacted to my father's death, it was everything. The sum of every dismissal, every condescending remark, every moment I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. And for what? So she could brush off my grief like an inconvenience? So she could check her schedule before deciding if she had time to mourn with me? I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. My head throbbed from lack of sleep. My muscles sore from tension I couldn't seem to shake. The house was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that felt heavy, like the walls themselves knew what was coming. I thought about the last time I had felt truly happy with Vanessa. It was harder to recall than it should have been. The early days had been good back when we were just two people figuring things out. Before the ambition. Before the expectations. Before she started looking at me like I was an obligation instead of a choice. Somewhere along the way, I had become a supporting character in my own life. Trapped in a role I hadn't realized I was playing. I needed to get out of the house. Grabbing my keys, I walked out without a second thought. My feet moving on autopilot as I climbed into my truck. The drive was a blur, my thoughts spinning too fast to focus. I didn't even know where I was going, until I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Rockwell Diner. The small, family-owned restaurant my dad used to take me to when I was a kid. It had been years since I had been here, but nothing had changed. The same faded neon sign. The same checkered floors. The same smell of coffee and grilled burgers wafting through the air. I slid into a booth in the back, running a hand over my face as exhaustion settled deep in my bones. A waitress came over, young, probably in her early 20s, with bright eyes and a kind smile. "Rough morning?" she asked, pouring coffee into a ceramic mug before I even had the chance to order. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "You could say that." She nodded knowingly, setting the coffee pot down. "Let me know if you need anything, okay?" I muttered a thank you, wrapping my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. For the first time in what felt like forever, I just sat. No distractions, no Vanessa talking about work, no emails, no passive-aggressive comments about how I should be spending my time. Just me, a cup of coffee, and the realization that I had spent the last decade of my life settling for something that was never meant to last. My phone buzzed against the table. I glanced at the screen. Vanessa. For a split second, I considered ignoring it. But I knew she wouldn't stop until she got the response she wanted. I sighed and picked up. "Yeah? Where are you?" "No hello. No how are you?" "Just straight to business. I needed some air." A pause. "Then, I just got out of a meeting. Have you scheduled the funeral yet?" I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temple. "I'll let you know when I do." Another pause. "I don't understand why you're being like this, Caleb. Like this." As if I was the one making things difficult. As if my grief was an inconvenience to her, something to be managed and scheduled around. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice flat. "I need to go." "Caleb," I hung up before she could finish. The waitress came back, hesitating when she saw the look on my face. "Everything okay?" I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "No, but it will be." She smiled sympathetically, setting a plate of toast in front of me. "This one's on the house. You look like you could use something good today." For the first time in days, I felt something crack through the fog of exhaustion. Gratitude. I nodded. "Thanks." As I ate, my mind drifted back to my father. He had seen it. All those years. The way Vanessa treated me. The way I let her. And yet, he never pushed. Never told me what to do. He just waited, watching, hoping I would see it for myself. And now, I had. There was no going back. When I finished my coffee, I left a generous tip and walked outside, the early afternoon sun warming my skin. I stood there for a moment, inhaling the crisp autumn air, letting it fill my lungs. I had spent so much time waiting for things to change, hoping that if I just tried harder, if I just gave a little more, Vanessa would wake up one day and realize what she had. But people like her didn't change, and I wasn't going to waste another second waiting for something that would never come. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. A new message sat at the top of my inbox. Claire Donovan, consultation confirmation. My pulse kicked up as I clicked on it. Hi Caleb, I'm available for a consultation this afternoon if that works for you. Let me know what time you'd like to talk. I exhaled slowly, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then, I typed out a response. 3 p.m. See you then. I hit send. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally moving in the right direction. The moment I walked back into the house, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was clarity. A sharp, unforgiving realization that I had spent the last decade of my life married to someone who had never truly seen me, never truly valued me. And now, I had to be smart. This wasn't just about walking away. It was about making sure I didn't walk away empty-handed. I set my keys on the counter, glancing around the kitchen. The pristine countertops, the expensive appliances Vanessa insisted on buying but barely used, the cold, sterile atmosphere. It was a perfect reflection of her. Everything about this house had been carefully curated to fit her image, to make her life more comfortable. My presence here? It was just a footnote, a necessary accessory to the carefully polished picture she had built for herself. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the email from Claire Donovan. We'll need to review all financial records, assets, and any documentation regarding shared accounts. If you have concerns about undisclosed spending or hidden accounts, I strongly suggest gathering as much information as possible before making your intentions known. I already knew Vanessa was reckless with money. She made 6 figures, yet somehow, she was always finding new ways to spend it. Designer handbags, luxury skincare routines, high-end furniture for a house she barely spent time in. And me? I had always been the one who balanced things out, making sure the bills were paid. The savings account wasn't completely drained, but lately, I had noticed something different. More charges than usual. More unexplained transactions. At first, I had assumed it was just Vanessa being Vanessa. But now, I wasn't so sure. I walked into the office, sat down at the desk, and opened our shared laptop. My hands moved automatically, typing in the password I had memorized long ago. The moment I accessed our joint account, my stomach twisted. Thousands of dollars. Gone. Not just spent, drained. Over the last 6 months, money had been steadily disappearing from our savings, funneled into transactions I didn't recognize. High-end restaurants I'd never been to. Boutique hotels. Personal shopping experiences at stores Vanessa had always claimed she didn't buy from. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the payments labeled as consulting fees. Repeated transactions, sent to the same name. Daniel Mercer. I didn't know a Daniel Mercer, but I had a feeling Vanessa did. My grip on the mouse tightened as I clicked deeper, tracing the pattern. The payments started small, barely noticeable. Then they increased, gradually, methodically, until they were in the thousands. If Vanessa thought she was being subtle, she was wrong. And now? Now I had proof. I grabbed my phone and snapped screenshots of everything: the transactions, the dates, the names. I forwarded them to my private email, then backed them up onto a flash drive. Claire was right. I needed to do this quietly. Vanessa was too calculated, too ruthless when it came to control. If she even suspected I was planning to leave, she would do everything in her power to make sure I walked away with nothing. I closed the laptop, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about deception. About betrayal. Had she been seeing someone? Or was this something else? Business related? A secret account? It didn't matter. The point was, she had been hiding it from me. And I wasn't going to sit back and take it. I pushed away from the desk, my mind spinning. I needed more than just financial records. I needed a full picture of what I was up against. I grabbed my keys again and headed to the garage, unlocking the filing cabinet where we kept our documents, mortgage papers, tax returns, insurance policies. I pulled them out one by one, scanning through the fine print. Then I found it, a new life insurance policy, one I hadn't signed, one that listed Vanessa as the sole beneficiary. My stomach turned. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. Vanessa had taken out a policy on me without telling me. It wasn't illegal, but it was sure as hell suspicious. Especially considering the way she had dismissed me. The way she had treated my father's death like it was nothing more than an inconvenience. A chill ran down my spine. Had I been blind this whole time? Had I spent years sleeping next to someone who would rather see me gone than standing in the way of her life? Her success? Her money? I folded the paper carefully, slipping it into my pocket. Evidence. Proof. If Vanessa thought she could manipulate me, if she thought she could push me aside and walk away with everything she was in for a rude awakening. I locked the cabinet, walked back into the house, and sat down at the table. I needed to think. Needed to plan. I had the financial records, the proof of hidden transactions, and now I had something even bigger. A reason. This wasn't just about leaving anymore, this was about winning. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers drumming against the wood as my mind raced through every possible scenario. The house was quiet, too quiet, but the silence only made the thoughts in my head louder. I had the proof now. The financial records, the suspicious transactions, the hidden life insurance policy. Vanessa had taken out in my name without my knowledge. That alone should have been enough to make me pack my bags and leave. But walking away wasn't enough. Not when she had spent years controlling every aspect of our life, of my life. If I left without a plan, she would do everything in her power to make sure I regretted it. No, I couldn't afford to be reckless. I had to be strategic. The first step was securing my finances. I'd already transferred a portion of my money into a separate account, a quiet, untraceable move that Vanessa hadn't noticed yet. But I needed to do more. I needed to ensure that when I walked away, I wouldn't be walking away with nothing. I grabbed my laptop again, opening a secure browser, and logged into my personal bank account. The joint account we shared still had money in it. And legally, I had every right to my half. I initiated a transfer, splitting it cleanly down the middle. If she checked the account tomorrow, she might notice, but it wouldn't matter by then. Next, the documents. The mortgage, the insurance policies, the tax records. I needed copies of everything. I went back into the office, moving quickly, but methodically, scanning and saving every critical document onto a flash drive. I emailed copies to myself, ensuring that even if Vanessa found out what I was doing, she wouldn't be able to erase the evidence. Every piece of information I collected was another layer of protection, another safeguard against whatever storm was coming. Then, there was the house. I didn't want to stay here. I couldn't. This place had stopped feeling like a home a long time ago. It was just another part of Vanessa's empire, another asset she wielded like a weapon. But I wasn't going to let her push me out and take it all without a fight. I made a call to Claire Donovan's office, my fingers tightening around my phone as I listened to the dial tone. Claire Donovan speaking. It's Caleb, I said, my voice steady despite the tension coiling in my chest. I have everything you asked for. The financial records, the documents, and something else. Vanessa took out a life insurance policy on me without telling me. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. That's concerning. Yeah, I muttered. That's one way to put it. This changes things, Claire said. It gives us leverage. And it raises questions ones she won't want to answer. Are you planning to confront her about it? No, I said immediately. Not yet. If she knows I'm onto her, she'll start covering her tracks. I need to be out before she realizes what's happening. Smart move, Claire agreed. What's your next step? I need to secure a place to stay. And I want to make sure that when I leave, I don't leave anything behind that she can use against me. There's something else you should consider, she said. If you suspect she's been funneling money elsewhere, or to someone else, you might want to hire a forensic accountant. They can track any hidden assets, offshore accounts, things that might not show up in a standard audit. Hidden accounts. Offshore money. It hadn't even crossed my mind, but it made sense. Vanessa was too meticulous to let her entire paper trail be this easy to find. The thought of what I hadn't uncovered yet sent a chill down my spine. I'll think about it, I said. For now, I need to focus on getting out. Good, Claire said. The sooner, the better. And Caleb, be careful. If she's been hiding this much from you already, there's no telling how she'll react when she finds out you're leaving. I hung up, the warning lingering in my ears. I moved quickly after that. I booked a short-term rental under a separate email and credit card, ensuring it wouldn't be easily traceable. A small, furnished apartment on the other side of the city, far enough to give me space. Close enough to handle whatever legal battle Vanessa would try to throw at me once she realized what was happening. Then, I started packing. Not the obvious things. If Vanessa walked in and saw suitcases lined up, it would be over before I even had the chance to leave. Instead, I focused on what mattered most. The things that belonged to me. The watch my father had given me when I graduated college. The old leather journal where I had scribbled down ideas, plans, dreams I had forgotten about. The framed photograph of my parents on their wedding day, one that Vanessa had never even bothered to hang up. I moved through the house like a ghost, collecting the pieces of my life that still had meaning. The ones that weren't tied to her. By the time I was done, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the walls. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom we had once shared, staring at the pristine bedspread, the untouched pillows, the perfectly arranged nightstand that held nothing personal, nothing real. It was a scene, a curated space designed to impress, not to live in. I wasn't going to miss this place. I exhaled slowly, then turned off the lights and walked away. I had everything I needed. And soon, I would be gone. I sat in my truck outside the house, the engine idling as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. The weight of what I was about to do settled in my chest, heavy and unrelenting. This wasn't just some passing argument, another cold exchange I could sweep under the rug. This was the end. The moment I took that final step, there was no going back. Vanessa had spent years controlling every aspect of our life, dictating the rules, deciding what mattered and what didn't. But this time, she wouldn't see it coming. I exhaled, forcing myself to move. The house was quiet when I walked in, but I could hear her in the distance, her voice. Low, clipped, sharp as a blade. Another business call, another conversation that had nothing to do with me. I stood in the entryway for a moment, listening. No, that's not acceptable, she said, frustration lacing every word. I don't care what they said, push the meeting. If they want this deal, they'll make time. I don't have the luxury of waiting. I shook my head, letting out a breathless laugh. That was Vanessa in a nutshell, always in control, always dictating terms. But not this time. I moved through the house quietly, heading straight for the office. The documents I had gathered were neatly stacked on the desk. My laptop opened to the email from Claire Donovan. Everything was in place. I reached into the drawer, pulling out the flash drive where I had saved every piece of evidence, every suspicious transaction, every hidden payment, every paper trail Vanessa thought she had buried. This was my insurance policy. A creak in the floorboard made me freeze. I turned, and there she was, standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "What are you doing?" she asked, her gaze flicking to the desk. I kept my expression neutral, my pulse steady. Just going through some things. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping into her features. Like what? I shut the laptop calmly, slipping the flash drive into my pocket. Does it matter? She took a slow step forward, tilting her head slightly. You're acting weird, Caleb. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah? Maybe that's because my dad just died and my wife can't be bothered to care. Her expression didn't change. No guilt. No remorse. Just mild annoyance, as if I were making her life difficult. I told you I have a lot going on. I can't just stop everything. There it is, I said quietly, nodding. Exactly what I expected. Her eyes flickered, a hint of uncertainty flashing across her face. For the first time in years, I had the upper hand. She could feel it, even if she didn't understand why. Yet. I straightened, slipping my phone into my pocket. I'm heading out for a bit. Vanessa's gaze darkened. Where? Does it matter? I echoed her words back at her. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then she sighed, rubbing her temple. Fine. Do whatever you need to do. Just don't make this harder than it has to be. That was the difference between us. She still thought she was in control. She thought this was just another argument. Another moment where she could dictate the outcome. She had no idea what was coming. I walked past her without another word, out the front door, into the cool evening air. I got in my truck, exhaling slowly as I started the engine. It was time to set everything in motion. The first stop was the bank. I walked in, my pulse steady, my plan unfolding step by step. I withdrew what I needed, making sure Vanessa wouldn't be able to cut me off financially when she realized I was gone. Then I moved to the next step, securing my rental. By the time I arrived at the apartment complex, the leasing agent was already waiting. She was efficient, professional, handing me the keys after I signed the last document. "Everything should be in order," she said with a polite smile. "Welcome home." Home. The word felt foreign, but it was mine now. I walked inside, setting my bag down, letting the quiet settle over me. No Vanessa. No tension. Just space. Freedom. I didn't stay long. There was still one last thing to do. By the time I got back to the house, it was dark. I moved quickly, grabbing what I had packed, careful not to leave anything I couldn't afford to lose. Then I walked into Vanessa's office and set the divorce papers on her desk, right in the center, where she couldn't ignore them. Beside them, I left a note. "Vanessa, I've taken what's mine. I've documented everything, and I suggest you don't try anything reckless. This is over." I stepped back, taking one last look at the life I was leaving behind. Then I walked out the door, and I didn't look back. The sun was barely up when my phone started vibrating against the nightstand. I already knew who it was before I even looked. "Vanessa." I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. But it didn't last long. Within seconds, the buzzing started again, this time more frantic, her impatience radiating through the screen. I stared at it for a moment, my heartbeat steady, my decision already made. Then I swiped to answer. "What the hell is this, Caleb?" Her voice was sharp, cutting, but beneath the anger, there was something else, something new. Panic. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders. "I assume you got my note." "The note?" she spat, incredulous. "You left divorce papers on my desk, emptied half the bank account, and disappeared. What the hell do you think I'm calling about?" I rubbed my temple, leaning back against the wall of my new apartment, feeling more exhausted than I ever had in my life. But beneath that exhaustion was something else. A quiet kind of satisfaction. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. "Caleb," she said, her voice dropping into something lower, something dangerous. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but you need to come home. Now." I laughed under my breath. She still didn't get it. "I am home, Vanessa." Silence. Just for a second. But it was enough. "You're being ridiculous," she finally said, her voice tight. "We can talk about this. But you don't just walk away like this. That's not how this works." "Funny," I muttered. Because that's exactly how it worked. A sharp exhale from her end. Then, the shift. The manipulation. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Recalibrating, searching for an angle she could exploit. "Look," she said, suddenly softer. "I know things have been tense. And I know I haven't always been the most attentive. But, Caleb, we have a life together. You don't just throw that away." A year ago, maybe even a month ago, I would have hesitated. I would have wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the version of her I had convinced myself still existed. But now? Now I knew better. "You threw it away," I said simply. I just finally stopped pretending otherwise. Her breath hitched, but she recovered quickly. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said, voice steady. "The mistake was staying as long as I did." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, just as I expected, the anger returned, simmering just beneath the surface. "So that's it? You're just done? You think you can pull some grand exit and leave me with nothing?" I smiled, but there was no amusement in it. "You might want to check again, Vanessa. I didn't take anything that wasn't already mine." She sucked in a breath, realization finally setting in. The bank accounts. The assets. The careful, calculated way I had made sure she couldn't blindside me like she had planned to. She hadn't expected me to fight back. She had never even considered that I might outmaneuver her. Her voice was a blade now, sharp and cutting. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said calmly. For the first time in a long time. A loud thud on the other end, something hitting a hard surface. Maybe her desk, maybe a wall. I didn't care. "You think this is over?" she hissed. I exhaled slowly, glancing around my apartment, the small, quiet space that belonged to me and no one else. "Yeah, Vanessa," the first said. "I do." And then I hung up. The silence after I hung up didn't last long. My phone buzzed again almost instantly. Vanessa wasn't the type to accept defeat. Not without a fight. I ignored the first few calls, but she was relentless. 10 missed calls in less than 5 minutes. Then the text started. Vanessa, pick up the damn phone, Caleb. Vanessa, you think this is funny? You think you can just walk away like this? Vanessa, you are going to regret this. I swear to God you are. I sat back in my chair, watching the messages flood in, each one more unhinged than the last. She was unraveling, and fast. For someone who prided herself on control, on always being the one calling the shots. This was unfamiliar territory. And she hated it. Then, just as I expected, the tone shifted. Vanessa, Caleb, let's just talk, please. You're making a mistake. Vanessa, we've built a life together. Don't throw it all away like this. Vanessa, just tell me where you are. We can fix this. I let out a slow breath, rubbing my thumb against my jaw. It was almost pathetic. Almost. The same old cycle: anger, manipulation, guilt. I had seen it before, lived through it, fallen for it. But not this time. A few minutes passed before another text came through. Vanessa, you really won't answer me? Fine. Let's see how you like what happens next. I frowned, sitting up a little straighter. Something about that felt different. The desperation had given way to something else: cold calculation. A warning. Then my email chimed. I glanced at the screen. Incoming message from HR at Morris Engineering. My stomach twisted. I clicked on the email, scanning the words quickly. Mr. Morris, we received a report concerning a possible violation of company policy. Given the nature of the complaint, we are required to conduct a formal review. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss this matter. I let out a sharp breath, jaw tightening. Vanessa. She had wasted no time. Of course, she hadn't. If she couldn't manipulate me into coming back, she would punish me for leaving. And this? This was just the beginning. I stared at the email, my pulse steady, but my mind racing. Vanessa had wasted no time. I had expected a reaction, a meltdown, maybe even some veiled threats, but this was calculated. A direct hit where she thought it would hurt the most. My job, my reputation. I clenched my jaw, exhaling slowly. She was trying to make me panic, trying to force my hand. But she had underestimated me again. I had anticipated this. Maybe not this exact move, but something just as petty, just as vindictive. She wanted me to react, to scramble, to beg her to stop. But I wasn't that man anymore. Instead of responding, I forwarded the email to Claire Donovan. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. She moved fast, Claire said, her voice cool, professional. But this isn't a problem. They're launching an internal review. There's no actual accusation yet. That tells me she doesn't have anything solid. She's fishing, I muttered. Trying to rattle me. And failing, Claire added. We'll handle it. In the meantime, don't engage. Let her dig her own grave. I smirked. I can do that. The next morning, I walked into my office, head held high. Vanessa had counted on me losing sleep over this, on me coming in looking defeated, desperate. Instead, I moved through the day like nothing had changed. I did my job, spoke to my coworkers, ignored the side glances from those who had clearly heard something but didn't know what to believe. I wasn't going to play into her game. By lunchtime, I got a call from HR. Caleb, we reviewed the report, my manager said, his tone careful. There's no substance to it. No witnesses, no evidence, just vague allegations. We're dropping it. I grinned, leaning back in my chair. Appreciate the update. The moment I hung up, I checked my phone. One new message from Vanessa. Vanessa, you really think you've won? This isn't over, Caleb. I chuckled under my breath. Me, yeah, it is. Then, I blocked her number. And just like that, she was gone. I sat on the small balcony of my apartment, a cup of coffee in one hand, my phone in the other. The morning air was crisp, the kind of coolness that made everything feel fresh, like a reset button had been hit on my life. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind. Vanessa's desperate attempts to control the narrative. Her last-ditch efforts to drag me through the mud. But in the end, she had lost. And I was still standing. After HR dismissed her baseless report, she had gone silent. At first, I thought maybe she was regrouping, planning her next move. But then, little by little, word started trickling down through the grapevine. Vanessa had been missing meetings, showing up late, making mistakes. The same woman who had once commanded every room she walked into was starting to crack under the weight of her own mess. Turns out, when you build your entire identity around power and control, losing it makes you dangerous. And Vanessa? She had never planned for this outcome. I had moved on. Not just physically, but mentally. The first few days in my new place had felt surreal. The quiet, the space, the realization that I didn't have to answer to anyone anymore. No more cold stares across the dinner table. No more walking on eggshells, waiting for the next dismissive comment. It was just me. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Then, 2 nights ago, I got an email. Vanessa, we need to talk. One last time. I had stared at it for a long time, debating whether to ignore it. But something in me wanted closure, not for her sake, but for mine. So, I agreed. Now, as I sat in my truck outside the cafe we had chosen, I felt a strange sense of detachment. There was a time when meeting Vanessa like this would have made my pulse race, my stomach twist with anxiety. But now, I just wanted to get it over with. I walked in, spotting her immediately. She was seated near the window, dressed impeccably as always. But there was something different about her. Her posture wasn't as rigid, her hair not as perfectly styled. And when she looked up and met my eyes, there was no fire, no arrogance, just exhaustion. I slid into the seat across from her, setting my keys down on the table. Vanessa. Caleb, she said, her voice quieter than I expected. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. Just 2 people who used to share a life, now reduced to this, a final conversation in a coffee shop that neither of us would ever visit again. She exhaled slowly, wrapping her fingers around her mug. So, this is it? I nodded. Yeah, this is it. She glanced out the window, pressing her lips together like she was debating what to say next. Then, she looked back at me. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. I let out a short laugh. That's the problem, Vanessa. You never thought I could. She flinched slightly, but she didn't argue. I don't understand. After everything we built, after everything we've been through, how can you just walk away? I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. Because I spent years trying to make this work. I bent over backward to be what you needed, to keep the peace, to pretend I wasn't miserable. And you? You never even noticed. She looked away, staring down at her coffee like it held all the answers. I noticed, she admitted after a long pause. I just didn't think it mattered. I nodded, my throat tightening. And that's why we're here. Silence stretched between us again. Finally, she sighed, pushing her mug away. I don't know who I am without you. The words surprised me. Not because I thought she didn't need me, but because I never thought she'd admit it. You'll figure it out, I said, standing up. You always do. She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something real in her eyes. Not manipulation. Not calculation. Just regret. I didn't hate her. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just felt done. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my jacket and placed it on the table. Finalized divorce papers, I said. Sign them, send them to Claire. Then we're done. She nodded slowly, running her fingers over the paper. Goodbye, Caleb. I gave her a small final nod. Goodbye, Vanessa. And then I walked away. The air outside felt lighter. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and drove toward a future that, for the first time in years, actually felt like mine. And just like that, she lost everything. The control, the power, and the husband she thought would never leave. But here's the real lesson: know your worth. If someone dismisses you, if they betray you, if they make you feel like you don't matter, walk away. No one deserves to be a side character in their own life. Now, tell me, have you ever seen a breakup this satisfying? What was your favorite moment? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that prove one thing: karma always comes back. Life is too short to waste on people who don't see your worth. In America, we value independence, strength, and the right to choose our own path. Yet, Too many stay trapped in toxic relationships, afraid to walk away. The truth? Staying in a loveless, one-sided marriage isn't loyalty, it's self-destruction. Know your value. Protect your future. Financial awareness isn't just for corporations, it's for you too. If someone manipulates, controls, or diminishes you, leave. Take back your life, your happiness, and your freedom. Because in this country, the greatest power we have is the power to walk away.